Welcome to our next video blog. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 5 at the very beginning of the Beatitudes, which are the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, probably his most famous sermon. Our God is a God of peace. I don't think many people would argue this point. Yeah, there were times in the Old Testament when God called his people to war when they needed an identity or they needed land. And we tend to get a little fixated on that and think of God as a big, brutal God. But the reality is God is a God of peace. Maybe it's easier to think of Jesus, who is God. Because very few people would look at Jesus and say, now there's a guy who's awfully violent. No, most people look at Jesus and think, Jesus is a God of peace. Peace in the Bible usually is the word shalom. The word shalom means the way it's supposed to be. Neil Plantinga says that in his book. Shalom means the way it's supposed to be. Everything and everyone living in harmony, working together the way that they should, watching out for each other. The opposite of peace that we think of may be war, but the opposite of shalom is division and selfishness. Every time we further divide people, every time we work to split people apart or to segment people, we are working against God's shalom. We've been discussing 9 of the primary characteristics of the image of God. We all know that God made us in his image, and each one of us reflects a different aspect of this image of God. We're looking at 9 different ways that this happens, most specifically. 9 ways that we reflect that image of God into the world around us. We've talked about curiosity. We've talked about helpfulness and about loyalty. We've looked at enthusiasm and order and achievement most recently. Today, I want us to take a look at one of the last 3, which is God's peace. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. We are called, every one of us, to be peacemakers, but some of us lean more heavily into that aspect of God's image than other people do. Everybody has an image piece that they lean heavily into, and that's what we've been talking about. Some people are peacemakers just inherently. Peacemakers are those people who hate and so work really hard to resolve any conflict of any kind. They hate conflict. These are amazing mediators because they inherently can see every different part of the argument. They can see this side, they can see that side, and they can see sides that aren't even in the discussion. They make really good friends because they will call you out when you're being one-sided in your thoughts. But they can also tend to get very lazy. Peacemakers are very afraid of conflict, and so they will not usually take a stand for most anything. Sometimes it's a fear, and sometimes it's a simple inability to choose one side when they can see good parts of all of them. A lot of times, peacemakers will put aside even really good things in order to avoid conflict, things God has called us to take up. See, God calls us oftentimes to take stands, and that's really hard for peacemakers. When they're at their most unhealthy, the battle cry of the peacemaker is, meh. But peacemaking is really, really hard work. Peacemaking takes wisdom. It takes calm. It takes open-mindedness. It takes your own inner peace in order to mediate between 2 warring sides, and this is not easy. But it's also not peacekeeping. I want you to hear the difference between peacemaking and peacekeeping. Peacekeeping is usually about maintaining the status quo. Peacemaking is usually about bringing peace to situations that don't have it. When I think of peacemakers in the Bible, obviously we all think of Jesus first, but I also think of Abraham from the Old Testament. From his quick trust of a God he barely knew, who said, leave your home, to the time in Egypt when he was willing to lie about his wife Sarah in order to keep peace between him and the Egyptian princes. I think about the moment when he was sitting with his nephew Lot, and they had too many sheep and too many shepherds and not enough land. So he took Lot out to a big bluff, and he looked out over the whole land. And he said, hey, you tell me which part you want, and I'll take the rest. Keeping the peace. And then, of course, the ever popular and most famous moment, this bargaining scene between him and God around the city of Sodom that Abraham wanted to not see destroyed, and God knew needed destroying. And so he came to God and he bargained with him. He tried to make peace. Abraham is constantly mediating, constantly seeking peace. He's constantly charming people around him and trying to welcome everyone. I love peace, but shalom is much better and much harder. Peace means sitting here in the great outdoors, enjoying nature, enjoying a quiet moment. Shalom means mediating injustices in our society so that they will slowly become the way it's supposed to be again. Peace means a lack of violence, a lack of war, a lack of conflict. But shalom means wise listening prayer to help discern God's will and then having the courage to make that happen. So are you a peacekeeper, fighting for the status quo, hating the change around you, always saying, but we've never done it that way before, and trying to stop anything from disrupting the way it's been? Or are you a peacemaker, listening for God's will and hating anything that isn't the way it's supposed to be? I hope you join me on a quest for peace. But more importantly, this quest is for shalom. All right, that's what I got today. Join us Sunday mornings at 9:30 on our website for our streaming worship service when we come together as a church and join together to worship God. Join us, won't you?